You know, people seldom go to the trouble of scratching the surface of things to find the inner truth.
You're here because you know something, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
Truth is stranger than lies. From deep inside the rabbit hole, here's your host, David Weiss.
And I'm Patricia Steere. Welcome to Truth is Stranger Than Lies. David Weiss, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic today with our special guest, Sofia Smallstorm.
You may know her from, well, many of the different things she's done in the conspiracy and truth world. 9/11 Mysteries, you can find that on YouTube. It's one of the things that helped me wake up to the truth of 9/11. Also, Unraveling Sandy Hook in 2, 3, 4, and 5 dimensions. She does work on chemtrails, Morgellons, and many other hot button issues. Today, we're going to talk to her about her new awakening in the flat earth world, and also about something that she's working on at this moment involving Baphomet and the transgender thing, and basically the blurring of genders. Sofia Smallstorm, thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you, both of you, for inviting me. I'm very privileged to be doing a show as David Weiss's guest, and I just met you, Patricia, so I will extend my privilege to that also.
Wonderful, and I hope at one point in the future you may decide that you would be on my show, Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes, which is a YouTube show, so we'll see if that might be something you might like in the future. David?
No, go ahead. Sofia, we're starting to talk about your new interest, your latest entry on your blog that could be found at sofiasmallstorm.com. Why don't you tell us about it?
Well, you know, I'm just struggling with this. You can hear me. I even stuttered when I was saying that. This whole hype that they've created over it's like incest, pedophilia, transgender, gender blurring, the Caitlyn Jenner. It's all kind of mixed together. And I just found this YouTube clip from the Ellen show of a little girl. She's 3 years old, having this absolute meltdown, as her mother calls it, because she learned that some pop singer that I never even heard of, Adam Levine, got married. And I think he's actually been married for a while, so I don't know how old all this is. But it is an absolutely amazing phenomenon. I remember in my youth, some of my little friends, when I was little, were into Donny Osmond, and they had posters of him and David Cassidy and, on their walls. But they were at least in their early teens, 11, 12, 13, but that three, having a notion that you want to marry someone, and it's just a little bit difficult for me to comprehend. And then, there's this big to-do when Adam Levine is invited to the set of the Ellen show to meet this little girl. And I looked for more information on him, and I found out he's quite well known. I don't know, I guess I live under a rock. And I found him sauntering down the road with a model that he used to be involved with, this Anne V from Victoria's Secret. And they're dressed in complete, I call it undercladding. She's wearing a man's undershirt, no bra, nothing, and men's underpants that are very loose. And it looks like she's got something, I think they even call it Packers, in her crotch. And then he's dressed in what's clearly pajamas, and he's shirtless, and he's got all these tattoos that are actually highlighting and framing the equivalent of breasts. And when I did a recent podcast with Mike Williams, Sage of Quay, I learned that the Baphomet sigil or ideal is being introduced now and extremely popularized. And this Caitlyn Jenner, if you can picture Caitlyn, or in her old life Bruce, with the big swirly hairdo, all the curls, that's Baphomet's horns. And if you look at the image of Baphomet, if you Google it, Baphomet is a half human and half goat, but he's not just half human, he's half male and half female. So Baphomet has a big erect male organ and these breasts, female breasts. And so what we're seeing, I think, is the push toward the integration of the genders and the popularization of switching off even from day to day, and making this a fashion statement. And as it becomes more than a fashion statement, a reality, as the plastics in our water, we have these chemicals called phthalates. They're estrogenic chemicals. They're starting to alter the biochemistry of males and making them more female. So it's actually happening physically.
You pointed out to me a while ago that these chemicals are prevalent in common receipts that we get when we shop at the store from the ink. What are they called? Xenoestrogens?
Yeah, xenoestrogens. It's actually in the coating. The receipts, cash register receipts, if you can remember from when you were a child, they used to be straight matte paper and they had like purplish ink on them. And now they're this glossy, shiny stuff. And that is the xenoestrogenic coating. It is a bisphenol A, a bromine-containing plastic. And these are endocrine disruptors in our reproductive systems. They are not only harming men and blocking testosterone, but they are creating a much higher risk of reproductive system cancer in women.
It's funny because, of course, David says he learned about that from you, Sofia, and I learned about it from David, and now I won't touch those receipts. I'm paranoid to touch those receipts. It's crazy.
Cashiers, they're so quick to put the receipt in with the money and hand it to you, and I've learned my timing so well where I'm like, no receipt, please.
And also all the money's filled with germs anyway, so you lose either way.
Well, I've actually started to take the receipt myself with my fingers, and I explained to the cashier, I'm pulling this receipt out of the register to spare you one more exposure to bisphenol BPA plastics. And they're aware of it, and they thank me. But I would rather do one exposure every few days myself than have them doing hundreds a day.
Water bottles, if you buy bottled water in a plastic bottle or get from the big blue cooler that you may have at your office, those may say BPA free on them, but indeed they do. The chemical is still in there and still leaches into the water supply. So if that is not something that all of our listeners are aware of, they really need to look into it. There's a good DVD called Tapped that will give you more information on that. And I'm sure there's many other things that can be found on YouTube and other people's websites and blogs.
Sofia, Patricia and I both distill our water. What type of water do you drink?
I have a purifier, but I'm looking into getting a much more expensive, if I can afford it, system that takes fluorides out of your water down to a very, very small quantity, almost 100%. But I haven't gotten that yet. I do have a filtration system that removes a lot of fluoride and arsenic. But again, our exposures are constantly mounting regardless. We are in a very threatened, imperiled kind of environment. We are imperiled and threatened in our environment today. But what I've understood is the more iodine you take as a supplement, the more you saturate your body with iodine on a daily basis and your cell receptors, because iodine is the halogen. This is all kind of complicated. It's in the family of bromine, chlorine, and fluorine, and it is the only biologically friendly halogen. In fact, it's vital to living things like us, mammals and other animals. And we are not getting it from our food supply anymore, and that has to do with the way that food is produced. We are having food made from grown in eroded soils and so forth. So iodine supplementation is very important, and I sell iodine in my online store. But when you take enough iodine, there's actually no place for bromine, chlorine, and fluorine to bind in terms of to sit on your cell receptors and start binding into your tissues with other elements that they like to combine with. So you tend to excrete more of that stuff. So that's a protective thing to do then, to take iodine.
What kind of iodine? I mean, we've got to go to a break in a minute, but what kind of iodine do you recommend? And I know it comes in a liquid form, and there's atom iodine, there's many other kinds. What kind do you sell on your website?
I have both nascent iodine and the traditional Lugol's formula. And one is potassium iodide, that's Lugol's, and the other one is straight iodine, which is a little more bioavailable because your body doesn't have to separate the potassium from the iodine as it would if you took Lugol's formula. But so I personally combine them both, and I think that works really well. I can only talk from my own experience, but lots of positive things began to happen to me as soon as I started doing what's called iodine supplementation. It was just indescribable. My body was so happy, and I knew it. There was no mistaking how powerful the changes were. And you have to go very, very slowly. You just start with one drop and increase by a drop or so a week. And you let your body explain to you just how much it wants.
We've got many other topics that we are going to continue discussing. We may continue talking a little about the feminization of men, other things like that with Sofia Smallstorm, as well as chemtrails, Morgellons, maybe Sandy Hook and Flat Earth, and more. David Weiss and I are here. And what else should we touch on, David?
Getting back to the Baphomet thing, we only have about a minute left. What do you think about President Obama's first ISIS speech, where the picture that the Associated Press put out was a picture of him with horns? It was the backdrop behind him, but it was clearly the 5 Baphomet horns. Did you see that, Sophia?
I didn't see it, but it wouldn't surprise me that they did that. They are starting to use this symbol more and more and more. And honestly, I used to think it was a satanic symbol and it was bad and, we should avoid it and all this. But Sage of Clay, Mike Williams explained in the podcast that I did with him. And you can find that on my podcast page on my website. But anyway, it's the use of a symbol to start changing the way we think.
All right. We'll get back to that and more as we continue. It's David Weiss and Patricia Steere, and this is Truth is Stranger Than Lies on Talk Network.
I like that. Check it out.
Welcome back to Truth is Stranger Than Lies. It's David Weiss and Patricia Steere, and our special guest is Sofia Smallstorm, and you may know her from 9/11 Mysteries and Unraveling Sandy Hook in 2, 3, 4, and 5 dimensions, and many other things. Check out her website, sofiasmallstorm.com, for more info on what we're talking about today, and probably things we'll never even get to. I was thinking when we were talking earlier about blurring the genders, Sophia, how in the porn industry, there is a focus on a sort of a small aspect, which is she-males. That's a big thing with the penis and the breasts in it being a man, and that ties it all back to sort of Caitlyn Jenner and all the other things we were speaking of in our first segment. So in the porn industry, this is also being normalized. You were speaking before we went to the break about when you were talking on Sage of Quay in an interview there about Baphomet and how it may not be, as many think, a satanic sort of thing. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, that kind of threw me, and it was not easy for me to start completely reforming my own understanding of what Baphomet is or could be. But Baphomet is an ancient sigil, symbol, entity. I don't know if it was some kind of godlike entity or what, but it was used by the ancient mystics, and that whole mysticism apparently was hijacked and turned into material for Luciferians and the modern ilk of controllers. They have apparently a very strong base in Satanism and Luciferianism, and they've taken these ancient Babylonian, I don't know what you call them, but let's just call them sigils, and they're incorporating them, like the all-seeing eye, and Baphomet being this integration of male, female, and animal. So this idea of pansexuality is evolving. Pan means across, everything, inclusive of everything. Miley Cyrus is not only performing like a little Baphomet on stage, but she's announcing that she is pansexual. And pan means, gosh, with infants, animals, robots, it's all inclusive. So the idea that the porn industry is talking about she-males, this fits completely with this pansexuality. And it's also going to pave the way for men to become more accepted as not full males, as they lose their masculinity and their maleness due to chemical disruption. We're in an age of synthetic biology, and the interest of science now is to work out just how and where it can dominate over natural tendencies, natural biology, to override it. So synthetic biology is going to render people non-reproductive. And we already saw that over a decade ago. Stress by itself will interrupt the female ovulation cycle. But stress and chemicals and, the messing up of human biology and human reproduction is definitely going to render people very infertile, and that's going to allow the state to come in and start overseeing and helping with conception, and we're going to end up having babies that are not only formed in vitro but in petri dishes, but they're going to be nourished in artificial wombs and then licensed to parents who qualify based on their mental, predilections and so forth.
That's absolutely crazy. I mean, you can see it happening everywhere. Do you think that they're purposely, putting these xenoestrogens in our environment, spraying, stuff in the air, genetically changing our food to create all of this, along with getting us to accustomed to it, kind of like predictive programming with all of these television shows? There's a new show where the father is becoming a woman, and they're just trying to make it such a normal thing.
Right, and not just a normal thing, but a happy thing, a great thing, a celebrated thing. And, whether they doctored this in their own plan and strategy years and years ago, I can't say, but not anything they do that creates mayhem in the natural way of things is in their interest, because as they destroy natural harmonies, they can then intervene and offer us corrections to those, which most people aren't educated or savvy enough to know are not going to work. And then we will be socially engineered to want science to save us. Remember when Obama came in, he was considered the science president, and they gave us Bush, who acted like a total dolt. He was completely unscientific and moronic, and he believed in, Genesis from the Bible. The earth was only 8,000 years old, and here comes Obama. Obama's got all these degrees, and he's so smart, and he's going to have technology save us. So that was issuing in the whole public mindset that we're going to be saved because this man's smart enough to do it, and he's walking in with all these scientific advisors.
It seems these days everywhere you look, especially in social media, the transgender issue is being pushed. And I know for some people this is a part of their life, and that's what they feel that they need to do. But then it seems as if you if you read about it and then speak about it and say just what we're saying here, you're shot down on social media and you're looked at as being a bad person, and you're almost, it's a prejudice aspect, and you're, thumbs down on Facebook if you say anything about any of this being wrong or bad. So there's a lot of social pressure involved too, as well as sort of the endocrine disruption that you're talking about. You think it's all leading us toward this world where even maybe cloning might become part of how new humans are brought into it because we won't be able to reproduce normally?
Yes, absolutely. Anything that science has to offer us, no matter how crazy it sounds, is going to be welcomed. I mean, they're going to eventually encourage us not to seek out person-to-person human relationships, but to interface totally through our screens and computers. That'll be number one. We're already doing that. And number two will be just forget about having a relationship with a real person. Here's a robot. You're going to enjoy this a lot more.
Yeah, they won't have any personality issues like being sad sometimes or being mad. Yeah, that seems like that's where we're going, David.
Hey, just doubling back to the beginning of this segment, we were talking about Baphomet and how this sigil of Baphomet is being used. Is just seeing that image, does that, I don't understand the effect that has on somebody. So what? There's a Baphomet picture. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
All right. Let me ask you, did you ever notice that the Baphomet goat thing image had female breasts? Did you ever notice that?
Oh, yes.
Okay, I didn't.
I didn't either.
Okay.
I didn't either. Mm-mm.
So now here's what's interesting. Patricia and I are both female. So now let's look at this in an unconscious, subconscious, Freudian type way. So we're female, presumably we both have breasts of some kind. Is that why we didn't notice it? You, David, are a guy. Do guys notice breasts more than women? I would say yes. So, okay, now, David, did you notice that the Baphomet character also had an erect male organ?
I did not.
There you go. Patricia, did you?
Yes, I did. Wow. There's a lot more to this than we know. It is working on a subconscious level. That is crazy.
Yeah, so that's just one teeny place you could start. So our unconscious sees everything. Have you ever forgotten something, where you put something, or you can't remember where you saw so-and-so, and you just go to sleep and you'll wake up in the middle of the night and your subconscious will be hammering at you awake and saying, I know where that thing is, or I know where you saw that person. So things that are buried, we take in so much information, and the, subtleties of the Baphomet figure have gone unregistered consciously, but they're very much, the data is definitely sorted and placed in some kind of reservoir unconsciously.
That's why I talk about predictive programming a lot, and I really understand how it works. Just by putting these things that we don't pay attention to consciously, our subconscious picks up everything. Like the kids at the Super Bowl from Sandy Hook. We're staring into the faces of these children that were supposedly murdered. It's amazing on just how all these different things, all the predictive programming for 9/11, and now that we're staring into the face of Baphomet, it's ridiculous. I sent you guys a link. Anybody that wants to see the Obama picture I was talking about, it's on the deepinsidetherabbithole.com, and then click on the symbology page, and it is amazing that they put this out and got away with it.
We've got to go to break, but before we do, I just wanted to add that all of these years I've gone to many concerts, and I would always see people throwing up what we call the devil horns, and I always thought the devil horns were just kind of like rock and roll, cool. And then people were like, well, that's the devil. And then later, after I woke up, I realized there's that Baphomet connection. And it's just something I was looking at all of my life and saw no harm in it, although I never did it myself. But now I see what that's all about. We're having these symbols right in front of our face that mean something, and they're getting into our subconscious, and we don't think it's anything really at all. Do you find those things happening to you all the time, that there are many other such things that we haven't even touched on, Sophia?
Yes, and we participate. That's the thing. We participate.
All right. Well, we'll come back and talk more about that with Sofia Smallstorm on Truth is Stranger Than Lies on Talk Network. Welcome back to Truth is Stranger Than Lies. It's David Weiss and Patricia Steere and our special guest, Sofia Smallstorm. In this segment, we're going to talk about how the powers that should not be are potentially attempting to alter us at a cellular level. Sofia, tell us more.
Well, you know that we are surrounded by frequencies. I mean, we've got this entire wave spectrum, heat, light. All of these are aspects of the wave spectrum. And humans are attuned to electromagnetic frequencies. We're electrical, and you'll really, understand that from your flat Earth studies. David has even helped me to understand how significant our electromagnetism is. So the Earth's electromagnetic field is very low frequency. It really just peaks once in a while during certain equatorial thunderstorms, at lightning storms at 32 to 40 hertz. So if you picture a wave, it's cycling or oscillating 40 times a second. Now, cell phones and Wi-Fi are 2.5 billion cycles per second, okay? And the decked phones that most people have, they're cordless phones. If you go into Office Depot or Staples, those are 5 billion, 6 billion, 7 billion cycles per second, the waves that come out. And these phones are constantly emitting, not just when you're getting a call. They're burping and blitzing out of their base station all day long and all night long to their little handset, brothers that are scattered around your house. Anyway, what's happening is human beings are being exposed to very high oscillating radio waves constantly, and it's jolting and jarring their neurobiology. It's destroying and breaking DNA strands, because the why for all of that is the fact that every frequency is felt by biological tissues as a physical force. That's the ground rule of piezoelectricity. If you Google piezoelectricity, you will see that frequencies are registered by tissues and cells as physical force. So what's happening when you get these high oscillation waves on your tissues? The calcium barrier inside the cell is being broken down. The cell can't keep toxins out and the good things in. There's so much. We are being basically, in my humble opinion, barraged and bombarded with this experience in order to harden us and get some of us used to, make a tolerance in us, a biological tolerance of this. Most people are going to collapse from it. They're going to get some kind of, degeneration. We're dying of degeneration now, organ and system failure rather than microbial and bacterial infections. And we're going to get all kinds of other irregularities like arrhythmias and ringing in the ears and whatnot. So there will be a few people that will be hardy enough to not feel anything. And I think ultimately those will be culled or selected to create the prototypes for humanity 2.0, the radiation tolerant and frequency responsive phase of human beings.
But what about the mental state of the people if there is a culling and they do want sort of a chosen people, a new part of chosen people, not the way we usually associate it? Do they want those people's mentality to be dumbed down? To me, it seems that's the case. And accepting of all sorts of things like the transgender thing and everything else we've discussed today.
Yeah, I think that the eventual prototype will be very confused in all ways, biologically and mentally. And, most people are just trying to grapple with what's happening, whether it's economics, whether it's, relationships, whether it's social issues, and, their health. I mean, how many people have health issues today at younger and younger ages? So ultimately, everybody's going to be struggling, but there are going to be the few that don't keel over outright from all these assaults, and they will be harvested, and their biology will be studied and harvested.
So most people are aware of the divide in class of people with money and without money, the upper class and the lower class. Are you saying that they're trying to divide us genetically, so there'll be a superior human race class and then the subhuman class?
Well, there were plans stated about this. Oliver Curry of London School of Economics did make that statement overtly, that humanity would be bifurcated and you would have a class of elites and a class of drones who would be good for jobs and, slogging through life and getting things done for the elites.
Seems like we have that now, though. But it does seem as if, don't you think, David, that we do already have the elites and we have the subservient class. There's really only that, and I guess you and I are part of the subservient class to the elites, unfortunately.
Sophia once mentioned to me that they're trying to turn us into those little troll dolls, with the little spiked up hair, those little short, pudgy, squat. And,
naked with no particular sex features.
So I actually mentioned that on my Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole podcast, and to my amazement, the producer of the show, my co-host, both had trolls in their pockets on their keychains.
Wow.
Well, there you are. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. This is sigil stuff. Remember, every little girl had to have a troll and a troll pony and comb the hair. I mean, maybe these people grew up in that age.
Well, it was big in the 70s, and then it seems to have come back because of sort of, everything retro kind of comes back when it comes to style and fashion and trends and toys and such. But why has it come back now? That's the interesting question. And we see why from what you're telling us.
Well, I never tracked trolls personally, but I found it rather interesting that the shape of the humanoid of the future is going to get shorter and squatter and rounder and dumpier and dumber.
Yeah, I'm seeing that everywhere.
But at least we'll have hair, crazy, multicolored hair. That's one thing to look forward to. Scary times.
Losing their hair.
Yes.
I've noticed, when you pointed out this thing with the receipts, I went into my local grocery store that's been there for years, and the women that are behind the cash register literally are the same women that were there when I was a child. A bunch of them, and they are all having male pattern baldness on their heads, very severely. And it just, to me, that's kind of proof, but I can't prove it.
I've also noticed a thing among younger women, teens and early 20s, of dyeing their hair pastel colors, like troll colors, like a light blue or a light pink, very unnatural colors. So it does seem maybe it's just a fashion trend. Yeah, you can write it off as that, but there may be something at work to make us into inhuman or non-humans characters almost if like a video game or something, or a cartoon.
Well, sure. I mean, anything is possible. The trends, they're probably experimenting with a lot of them, and they're going to see which one takes, like the big holes in the cheeks and the massive earlobes and all of that. This is beyond me. Now I'm feeling like, a very old-fashioned person.
I don't see the big holes in the earlobes taking. I don't see that.
No, it's been going on. It's actually a tribal thing, and they're called gauges. And you put a plug in a gauge, and you make your earlobe. It's a tribal thing that became a hipster thing. So, yeah. But I saw somebody with a Christmas light in one of their holes.
Oh, now that's good. I like that.
It's festive. Oh, well, maybe we just sound like three old people talking about kids today, but this is all odd when you look at it from a bigger picture. Sophia?
Well, somebody told me they're doing holes in their cheeks now, and you can see into their cheeks and look at all their teeth.
I've seen a picture of that, and I wasn't sure if that was Photoshop or real. It was frightening either way.
It's horrible.
Well, I know people who've seen it. So this idea, okay, you can call it mutilation. So then what will happen? There was a popular article, or I think it got some attention, that's the proper word to use, people wanting to have their body parts taken off, voluntary amputation, because technological parts were superior. You can run faster if you have technology legs rather than muscles that get fatigued.
And then, of course, we've got people just spending most of their time in the virtual reality of, the online world. And I'm somewhat guilty of that, having 2 Facebooks and Twitter and doing YouTube videos. And most of my friends, because I've become more and more of a conspiracy-oriented person, are online as opposed to in real life. But I do understand what I'm doing. And do you think awareness of these things can prevent us from being sucked into the matrix, Sofia?
Well, it's all about stages. In your generation, people have awareness, but in the next generation, they won't. And we're not going to live longer than our lifespan. So it's all about gradual reformation of the way people think, what they object to and what they won't object to. People will lose the awareness that you have in the next generation. They're just not going to have it.
Yeah, we're on one social media platform talking about YouTube and directing people to Twitter and Facebook and Snapchat and all these other things I don't even know exist. And, as if the one we're on isn't good enough. It's almost like when you see people in crowds with their friends and family members, but they're on their phone checking, their email. There's not much human interaction anymore. David?
I totally agree with that. And I'm as guilty, if not more than you. The thing is, with the research that we do, the internet is the unbelievable tool that just delivers us content from around the world in seconds. So, how do you spread truth? How do you find information, without spending a decent amount of time on the internet?
Yeah, I agree. And that is really the library of today. I have a lot of books. I love books, but most of the things I look at are, online. And that's how I do spread truth. And that's how I found you, David, and you, Sofia. So I guess we do like these internet type of connections, but we also have to attempt to stay in the real world. Up next, we're going to continue our talk in the last segment of Truth is Stranger Than Lies with Sofia Smallstorm and David Weiss. We'll focus on our favorite topic, David. It's Flat Earth. Coming up next on Truth is Stranger Than Lies. Welcome back to the final segment of Truth is Stranger Than Lies on Talk Network. It's David Weiss of Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole, and I'm Patricia Steere of Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes on YouTube. And we've got our guest, Sofia Smallstorm. You can find out more about her work on sofiasmallstorm.com. And you may know her from her 9/11 work and her Sandy Hook work and many other things on chemtrails and Morgellons and etc. But right now we're going to talk about Flat Earth and how you are somewhat of a recent... You've recently come to the whole idea. How did that happen for you, Sofia?
A friend suggested that I look at it, and because he was so smart and he was so logical and methodical, I decided, okay, if he's looking into this, I'm going to listen to him. And so I did, and he sent me some links, and he explained some things over the phone, and I found them quite fascinating. And, my belief is this. If somebody says something to me and they're someone I've already known for a while, even if they're not, let's just say, but what they're saying is measured and reasoned, I should at least think about it, at the very least. And so as I started looking at things, especially the UN flag, and when I got the concept of this, what the flat Earth is, in my mind with the Antarctic circle around it and how the sun moves. It was from a video that David, I think, made himself that I finally understood. Okay, in that concept, this is what the sun would do. This is how we get our seasons. And it certainly beat to shreds, beat to a pulp what I learned in school, which I never could accept. It always was extremely weak, the way the seasons turn with our orbit around the sun. So once I got this way of how the seasons happen, that opened the gates for me. It really did. And then the more I've learned about it, the more interesting it has become to me.
Well, about when was that? And was the person that you respected and admired that told you about this David Weiss, of all people?
This David Weiss, the very same, the Mr.
I figured.
No. I see what you're saying. No, the original friend was not David Weiss, but David Weiss soon bolted after him in my tiny stable of Flat Earth junkies.
Was this the same person that we did the Flat Earth show on your podcast?
Yes, it was Greg. And Greg is really, really smart. He's not insane. He's not a lunatic. So, then I mentioned to David Weiss, I said, hey, do you know about the Flat Earth? And oh my God, he'd been into it and he hadn't mentioned it to me yet. But when he heard that I had actually opened my mind to it, he started sending me a lot of information. And I'm telling you, it is absolutely fascinating. I think it's a good exercise to change your worldview every now and then, just to try something on for size, theoretically, and see where does it miss and where does it fit. There is nothing wrong with that.
I think it's a great idea, too. Go ahead, David.
Flat Earth is one of those things that is just kind of outside of the belief system, like 9/11, Sandy Hook, Boston, chemtrails. Everyone's like, all right, I'll look at this. I don't know if I believe it, but most people put Flat Earth as, I'm not even going to look. And we've been programmed with that our entire lives to this very day. Obama recently said, we don't have time for a meeting of the Flat Earth Society. Jim Carrey said he said the same thing recently. And it's not until you really look at this, people, when they take a good, hard, educated look, if they have any bit of intelligence, they convert over and never go back. Somebody just said that they started listening to my podcast. We're about 100 episodes, well over 100 episodes, and they've been listening to it in reverse. And they said I went from a flat earther to a ball earther, and it made more sense to them because they have not looked into flat Earth. I thought that was kind of interesting, but. I don't know why I'm saying all that. It's just, if anybody looks into the flat Earth, it's a rabbit hole that you can't get out of.
And it's fun, too. It's enjoyable. And once you find out that we've been lied to, the difference in what that appears superficially and what it really is that it's not a negative thing. Yes, it's negative to know we've been lied to, but it's positive because once you know that, you can find your way out. And Sofia, have you found that this flat Earth thing ties back somehow into the other things you've been interested in over time, like 9/11 and Sandy Hook and chemtrails, et cetera, just because all of these lies sort of have a platform on which they stand, which is the flat Earth?
I don't know that I can say that, but I will say this. It was mentioned to me by a very seasoned salt of the earth ocean type a couple of weeks ago that our sunset and sunrise wasn't equally distributed around the 21st of December. And what I'm trying to say is I had thought that the days would start getting longer after the 21st, and that is correct, but not in terms of when the sun sets and when it rises. I call this sunset creep. Apparently in our latitude, let's call it that, San Diego, the sun was already starting to stay visible later in the second week of December. After December 7th, our sunset is at 4:45. Before December 7th, it's at 4:44. And this was shocking to me. And the same happens with sunrise. Sunrise is later and later. Forget about the 21st. The sun will continue to rise later, all the way to January 7th, and then it starts to back off. So I brought that to David like a dog with a slipper, and I said, can this be explained in terms of the flat Earth?
We're trying to get some people that are good at AutoCAD and other programs to model it, but what it means is that something is speeding up or slowing down. So is the sun speeding up or slowing down? Because that would shift it. It would make that creep you're talking about, that would shift it from, rather than just the nights getting a little bit longer, so it sun sets a little early and sun rises a little later. as those nights are getting longer, it's creeping forward in time. And it either means that the sun revolves around the Earth and it is changing speeds, or that the spinning of the Earth is changing speeds. And we know that's not the case, because if it was, there would be earthquakes, the oceans would slosh out of their basins, we'd all be sick, it would be the end of the world. So to me, this could be one of the biggest proofs of the flat Earth.
Interesting. And many people find that when they come to the flat Earth, that they believe that the sun does sort of concentric spirals. And at one point it's going a little faster, and at another point it's going a little slower. And then other people have been talking about how the sun does a figure 8 pattern over the flat Earth. So the movement of the sun is one of those things like mysterious in some ways, although we're trying to get a handle on it. And I sometimes wonder if in our lifetime, or any of our lifetimes, we'll ever know the truth. David, what do you think? Do you think we'll ever have a real view of what we're living on?
You know, the 8 months ago or so, or less than a year ago when this started, the Flat Earth videos were around 60,000. A month ago, they were at 1.4 million, and just the other day they were over 2 million. So this the awareness is really shooting through the roof. Will something derail it? I don't know. You know, I actually think that the flat Earth reality will go mainstream unless the power gets shut down to stop communications in the near future.
Yeah, I am worrying about that all of the time when I see we're maybe moving towards some kind of an orchestrated war, China, Russia. You hear about these things all the day, economic crashes, the potential for, and rumors of varying natural disasters that probably wouldn't be natural. They'd be man-made and written off as natural. All of these things worry me. They could be used by the powers that should not be to shut down flat Earth. And I've had people say, what do you think, flat Earth's that important that they do that? They don't even care about you. They're worrying about, NASA and more important things. Flat Earth's a lie. David, you hear that same thing?
Every rejection, with people just reject it without looking into it and just regurgitate the programming that they've been programmed with. When you asked earlier about the connections to the stuff that we research, that Sofia researches, I've been thinking a lot about the spraying in our skies, and to this spraying, we know that they're spraying, but we don't know necessarily why they're spraying, and there could be a whole bunch of reasons. But I think that has something to do with blocking the frequency of the light that we're getting from the stars, from the sun, from the planets. And all of these things are not what we are told they are. Astrology is the real science and astronomy is the fake science. What do you think about that, Sofia?
Well, I actually am working on a theory that was born last night in the middle of the night, and that's when I get my best theories. I wake up in the night because my unconscious is hammering away and it's got something to tell me. But I'm not going to air that right now. What I want to say, though, for clarification, for people who may not be on board with the flat Earth, is the phrasing that the sun revolves around the Earth is a little bit confusing. I would say that it circles above the Earth. It does spirals. And when you actually see a diagram of that, or someone shows you with their hand what they're talking about, it makes all kinds of sense. So I am going to be very excited when the sun starts coming back toward the Tropic of Cancer, and that would be around December 21st, and our days will get a bit longer and warmer. And this sunset creep thing was new for me, but I feel that it's one little contribution I may have brought.
It would be a huge contribution as that gets into the AutoCAD and gets modeled. And I do want to say, for those who are trying to picture the sun with the spiraling effect that we're talking about here, just imagine a needle on a record player. As the needle goes closer, and then if the record were to play backwards by itself, it would go farther out. Just concentric spirals over the flat Earth. David?
That's actually a great point. It's still doing, when it's near the center, which is a much smaller circle versus the outside, it's still doing a loop at the exact same speed, even though it's got twice the distance when it's near the outside of the record. So that's an actual perfect example.
So what you're not really ready to reveal that you were thinking of the other night, Sofia, will that appear on your blog at some point on sofiasmallstorm.com?
I just want people to open your mind. Don't freak out. Just open your mind, try on something that's completely new. And that doesn't mean you should become a transhuman or blur your gender necessarily, but just, this theories. Just try a new theory of an explanation.
Thank you, Sofia. And this has been Truth is Stranger Than Lies on Talk Network.
And the popularization of switching off even from day to day, and making this a fashion statement. And as it becomes more than a fashion statement, a reality, as the plastics in our water, we have these chemicals called phthalates. They're estrogenic chemicals. They're starting to alter the biochemistry of males and making them more female. So it's actually happening physically.
You pointed out to me a while ago that these chemicals are prevalent in common receipts that we get when we shop at the store from the ink. What are they called? Xenoestrogens?
Yeah, xenoestrogens. It's actually in the coating. The receipts, cash register receipts, if you can remember from when you were a child, they used to be straight matte paper and they had like purplish ink on them. And now they're this glossy, shiny stuff. And that is the xenoestrogenic coating. It is a bisphenol A, a bromine-containing plastic. And these are endocrine disruptors in our reproductive systems. They are not only harming men and blocking testosterone, but they are creating a much higher risk of reproductive system cancer in women.
It's funny because, of course, David says he learned about that from you, Sofia, and I learned about it from David, and now I won't touch those receipts. I'm paranoid to touch those receipts. It's crazy.
Cashiers, they're so quick to put the receipt in with the money and hand it to you, and I've learned my timing so well where I'm like, no receipt, please.
And also, all the money's filled with germs anyway, so you lose either way.
Well, I've actually started to take the receipt myself with my fingers, and I explained to the cashier, I'm pulling this receipt out of the register to spare you one more exposure to bisphenol BPA plastics. And they're aware of it and they thank me. But I would rather do one exposure every few days myself than have them doing hundreds a day.
Water bottles, if you buy bottled water in a plastic bottle or get from the big blue cooler that you may have at your office, those may say BPA free on them, but indeed they do. The chemical is still in there and still leaches into the water supply. So if that is not something that all of our listeners are aware of, they really need to look into it. There's a good DVD called Tapped that will give you more information on that. And I'm sure there's many other things that can be found on YouTube and other people's websites and blogs.
Sofia, Patricia and I both distill our water. What type of water do you drink?
I have a purifier, but I'm looking into getting a much more expensive, if I can afford it, system that takes fluorides out of your water down to a very, very small quantity, almost 100%. But I haven't gotten that yet. I do have a filtration system that removes a lot of fluoride and arsenic. But again, our exposures are constantly mounting regardless. We are in a very...
No, go ahead. Sofia, we're starting to talk about your new interest, your latest entry on your blog that could be found at sofiasmallstorm.com. Why don't you tell us about it?
Well, I'm just struggling with this. You can hear me. I even stuttered when I was saying that. This whole hype that they've created over it's like incest, pedophilia, transgender, gender blurring, the Caitlyn Jenner. It's all kind of mixed together. And I just found this YouTube clip from the Ellen show of a little girl. She's 3 years old, having this absolute meltdown, as her mother calls it, because she learned that some pop singer that I never even heard of, Adam Levine, got married. And I think he's actually been married for a while, so I don't know how old all this is. But it is an absolutely amazing phenomenon. I remember in my youth, some of my little friends, when I was little, were into Donny Osmond, and they had posters of him and David Cassidy and, on their walls. But they were at least in their early teens, 11, 12, 13. But that three, having a notion that you want to marry someone, and it's just a little bit difficult for me to comprehend. And then, there's this big to-do when Adam Levine is invited to this.
People seldom go to the trouble of scratching the surface of things to find the inner truth.
You're here because you know something, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
Truth is stranger than lies. From deep inside the rabbit hole, here's your host, David Weiss.
And I'm Patricia Steere. Welcome to Truth is Stranger Than Lies. David Weiss, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic today with our special guest, Sofia Smallstorm.
You may know her from, many of the different things she's done in the conspiracy and truth world. 9/11 Mysteries. You can find that on YouTube. It's one of the things that helped me wake up to the truth of 9/11. Also, Unraveling Sandy Hook in 2, 3, 4, and 5 dimensions. She does work on chemtrails, Morgellons, and many other hot button issues. Today, we're going to talk to her about her new awakening in the flat earth world, and also about something that she's working on at this moment involving Baphomet and the transgender thing, and basically the blurring of genders. Sofia Smallstorm, thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you, both of you, for inviting me. I'm very privileged to be doing a show as David Weiss's guest, and I just met you, Patricia, so I will extend my privilege to that also.
Wonderful, and I hope at one point in the future you may decide that you would be on my show, Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes, which is a YouTube show, so we'll see if that might be something you might like in the future. David?
Set of the Ellen show to meet this little girl. And I looked for more information on him, and I found out he's quite well known. I don't know, I guess I live under a rock. And I found him sauntering down the road with a model that he used to be involved with, this Anne V from Victoria's Secret. And they're dressed in complete, I call it undercladding. She's wearing a man's undershirt, no bra, nothing, and men's underpants that are very loose, and it looks like she's got something, I think they even call it Packers, in her crotch. And then he's dressed in what's clearly pajamas, and he's shirtless, and he's got all these tattoos that are actually highlighting and framing the equivalent of breasts. And when I did a recent podcast with Mike Williams, Sage of Quay, I learned that the Baphomet sigil or ideal is being introduced now and extremely popularized. And this Caitlyn Jenner, if you can picture Caitlyn, or in her old life Bruce, with the big swirly hairdo, all the curls, that's Baphomet's horns. And if you look at the image of Baphomet, if you Google it, Baphomet is a half human and half goat, but he's not just half human, he's half male and half female. So Baphomet has a big erect male organ and these breasts, female breasts. And so what we're seeing, I think, is the push toward the integration of the genders